The sound of the living room camera notification broke the early morning silence. Half asleep, I picked up my phone, not imagining what I was about to see. The screen illuminated my tired face, and within seconds, the sleepiness vanished completely. There he was, my husband, walking through the living room in the middle of the night. But he wasn't alone. In the background, a female shadow was approaching. My heart raced when I realized who it was. The maid, who had spent so much time with me on a daily basis, appeared smiling at him. At first I thought it was something trivial, a quick conversation, but her gestures betrayed something else. She moved too close, almost brushing his arm, and it made me uncomfortable. I clutched the phone tightly, feeling the anxiety growing. It was as if my world began to crack in silence. That's when, without hesitation, I saw the two of them exchange a hidden kiss, quick but impossible to deny. A chill ran through my entire body and I felt my stomach churn. I was no longer suspicious. It was the truth printed in pixels before me. My home, my trust, my routine. Everything was being desecrated. I didn't know it, but that scene would only be the beginning of an even more devastating revelation. The next day, I woke up with heavy eyes from silent crying. I looked to my side and saw him sleeping soundly as if nothing had happened. His breathing was calm, serene, and that made me even angrier. How could he lie next to me after having done what I saw? I swallowed hard and pretended to be asleep when he opened his eyes. He got up normally, went straight to the bathroom, and put on his morning music on his phone. As the shower ran, I sat on the bed, hugging my knees. I didn't want to believe that scene was real. I tried to convince myself that perhaps I had misinterpreted it. But the image of the kiss returned, clear and cruel, with every passing second. During coffee he said, as always, "Good morning, love, did you sleep well?" I took a deep breath and nodded in response. The maid arrived minutes later, greeting everyone with that same smile as always. When our eyes met, my stomach tightened. Did she know I'd seen her? Was she making fun of me? I tried to maintain my routine as if nothing had happened. I set the table, made the bread, poured the coffee. He talked about work commitments, an important meeting. I feigned attention, but every word he said seemed to echo in a parallel reality. It was like watching a movie where I was no longer the protagonist. I began to observe their gestures, the quick glances, the hidden smiles. Small details I'd previously ignored now became glaring. They barely touched in front of me, but the closeness was evident. It was as if there was an invisible line between them, and I was the only one who hadn't noticed it before. Now everything made sense. During the afternoon, while she cleaned the living room, I stood in the kitchen watching. Her movements were normal, but the memory of the early morning transformed everything into a threat. Every time she ran her hand over the furniture, I wondered if she'd already touched his face. And that thought gnawed at me. He came home late from work, saying he was exhausted. I prepared dinner, trying to act normal, but the food just wouldn't go down. The table was silent and every bite felt like torture. I could see them talking out of the corner of my eye in small details that cut like knives. It was impossible not to notice. That night, he left his phone charging in the living room. My heart raced at the opportunity. I walked over there taking light steps, but when I touched the phone, I saw it was password locked. A new password. This had never happened before. It was at that moment that the certainty that something was wrong consumed me. I returned to the bedroom, lay down next to him, and closed my eyes. Sleep wouldn't come, only repetitive thoughts, and the desire to confirm everything. The betrayal was no longer a doubt, but I needed irrefutable proof. Something that couldn't be erased or denied. Something that would turn him against his own lie. The next day, I made a point of leaving home early, saying I had commitments. In fact, I remained parked in my car on the street, watching his movements. I saw him rush out and take a ride-hailing service. I wrote down the time, recorded the screenshot. Everything was starting to fit together like a cruel puzzle. The hours seemed to drag by as I waited. When I returned home, I found the maid alone, tidying the room. She acted as if it were just another day, but deep down her presence suffocated me. It was like living with an enemy within your own fortress. I began to notice his clothes. Shirts that came back from the dry cleaners with strange smells, ties out of place. Even his beard seemed to be being shaved at odd hours, as if he were on impromptu dates. Every detail was a signal screaming in my mind. Trust was gone. That night, while he showered, I saw a notification on the smartwatch he'd left charging. It was a quick message, but enough to chill me. It was amazing today. I want to do it again. His full name wasn't there, just an initial, but I knew. My entire body trembled with anger and fear. I could have confronted him right then and there, but I held back. I decided I needed to piece it together before acting. I didn't want to seem like a jealous wife. I wanted to present the facts. So I took a deep breath and let the message fade from the screen. But its weight remained etched in me like a hot iron. The next morning, he acted normally, even a little too affectionate. He made a point of hugging me and making coffee. I could sense the exaggeration in every gesture, as if he were trying to hide something. His closeness, which had once been comforting, now repulsed me. It was like receiving affection from a stranger. At work, I could barely concentrate. The phone in my hands felt like it weighed a ton. I wanted to install some app to monitor him, but I didn't know how without arousing suspicion. I was torn between the fear of confirming and the need to know. I lived on an emotional tightrope, on the verge of collapsing. I talked to a close friend without revealing everything. I simply said I felt something strange. She tried to calm me down, saying it might be paranoia, but at the same time she blurted out, "A woman's intuition never fails." That phrase echoed in my head all day. I arrived home to find them laughing in the kitchen. The scene was simple. She was chopping vegetables, and he was making silly comments. But the look they exchanged when they noticed my presence was enough. It was quick, almost imperceptible, yet charged with complicity. I felt like a ghost in my own house. That night, I made a silent decision. I would no longer be passive in the face of this. I began recording schedules, noting small inconsistencies. I created a hidden folder on my phone just to store evidence. I knew that sooner or later, that truth would explode, and I would be ready. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions. Between fake smiles, rehearsed gestures, and banal excuses, I collected evidence. With each new clue, the image I had of him shattered further. The man who promised eternal love was nothing more than an actor on stage, and I was forced to watch without applauding. I even started noticing his social media. Likes at unlikely times, disguised comments, interactions I'd previously ignored. It was as if the digital world was screaming the truth he was trying to hide. And I could no longer pretend not to see it. The lie was everywhere. Even with all this, a part of me still hesitated. Maybe it was fear of destroying a lifetime of history. Maybe it was the pain of accepting that I'd been deceived. But every time I remembered the kiss in the living room, the fear turned into strength. I needed to see it through for myself. The routine in the house became a minefield. Every time she arrived, I felt the air heavy. Every time he said I'm tired, I wondered about the real reason. Our coexistence became a suffocating theater, where I was the only one who knew the true script. And this gnawed at me, day after day. One night, he left his cell phone on the table while answering a call in the bedroom. My heart raced. I picked up the phone, and to my surprise, the password was the same as always. Maybe I forgot to change it. I hurriedly logged in, but there was nothing. Deleted conversations, cleared records. This cleansing was, in itself, a confession. I stood there, motionless, staring at the empty screen. I no longer needed explicit messages. His effort to erase everything was proof enough. Those who owe nothing fear nothing, and he clearly did. This realization hurt even more than any message I could have read. I closed my phone, took a deep breath, and returned to my seat. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I simply jotted down another piece of truth in my collection. From then on, I began to plot how to reveal everything. It wouldn't be with words, but with undeniable facts. With images that spoke for themselves. And so every gesture, every detail, every silence became fuel. I was no longer just a wounded wife. I was becoming an investigator of my own life. And deep down I knew that when the time came, the impact would be devastating. For him, for her, for everyone who believed the lie. What I didn't imagine was that the revelation would come from where I least expected it. A clue left by chance, beyond his control. Something simple, every day, but it would brutally reveal the truth. I was about to discover much more than I expected. That week, I decided to discreetly adjust my routine. I left work early 2 days in a row, pretending to have non-existent commitments. I wanted to observe the movements of the house without anyone suspecting. Sitting in the car, a few meters away, I watched her arrival and departure times. It all seemed banal, but my heart no longer believed in coincidences. One afternoon, I noticed he returned earlier than usual. He parked the car, quickly went inside, and immediately afterward the doorbell rang. It was her, the maid, entering as if nothing had happened. I wrote down the exact time on my phone, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. There was no explicit proof, but the sequence spoke for itself. Sometimes I wondered if I wasn't exaggerating, creating stories in my head. But then I remembered the kiss the camera showed, and the doubt disappeared. What I saw now were just fragments of a truth already revealed. The challenge was to piece these fragments together into something impossible to deny. I could no longer deceive myself. That night, over dinner, he mentioned how tired he was of the routine. He said work was draining his energy. As he spoke, I noticed a faint, hidden smile, as if carrying a joy that didn't belong to me. His body was present, but his soul seemed elsewhere, and that hurt more than any absence. I spent the night awake, turning over every detail in my memory. The deleted messages, the vibrating watch, the knowing glances. It was like watching a movie whose ending I already knew, but I needed to see every scene to be sure. My head throbbed, but my heart was determined. I wouldn't be fooled into silence. Days later, an unexpected clue appeared. I received a notification of purchases on the card in my name. The price wasn't high, but the location caught my eye, a restaurant on the other side of town. I checked the date and time, and they coincided exactly with the afternoon he said he was stuck in a meeting. The shock was immediate. On impulse, I went to the restaurant's website and looked at the photos. It was a romantic setting, known for dinners for two. I felt my breath catch and a pang in my chest. He wasn't just cheating on me, he was living another life on the side. And the cruelest part was using resources that were also mine to fuel this charade. I decided I needed more. I called the credit card company and requested a detailed statement. When I received it in the email, I spent hours analyzing it. There were other strange expenses: ride-hailing apps at unusual times, small purchases at convenience stores near hotels. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place cruelly. While he slept, I silently printed out the receipts. I kept everything in a folder I hid in the back of the closet. It was like assembling a dossier against someone I'd called the love of my life until yesterday. The feeling was bitter, but each trial gave me more strength. I wouldn't be destroyed by lies. The next day, she arrived, smiling, as always. She carried a bag of fruit, saying it was a family gift. I accepted, but I could barely look at her. Inside, I only thought about how someone could live with me every day, and at the same time, bear such disloyalty. It was a daily affront. I began to observe not only the two of them, but also how the people around them reacted. A neighbor once innocently commented, "Your husband has been working a lot, hasn't he? I always see him coming home at odd hours." I smiled automatically, but inside I confirmed it as another piece of my secret archive. Weekends, once spent with family, became empty. He invented appointments, last-minute meetings, get-togethers with friends I hadn't met. I no longer questioned them as much, just recorded them mentally. The more he tried to deceive me, the easier it became to piece together the complete picture of his betrayal. One night, lying in bed, I realized how much I had changed. Before, I trusted blindly. Now I analyzed every detail. Before, I believed in words. Now only in evidence. I wasn't the same woman. I was becoming colder, more calculating, more resilient. And maybe that was exactly what would save me. At work, I started to disguise myself better. I learned to laugh in normal conversations, to hide the weight of what I carried. But whenever I looked in the mirror, I saw a different look. A look of someone who knows too much, but can't yet reveal it. It was like living in two worlds at once. One day, he dressed up more than usual to go out. He put on a shirt he rarely wore, applied too much perfume, and carefully styled his hair. I asked where he was going, and he replied, "A meeting with an important client." I shook my head, but deep down, I already knew. I etched that moment into my memory because it was a replayed scene from a dirty script. Later, I tracked the Uber he used. The race ended in front of a discreet hotel, far from everything. My blood ran cold. There was no denying anything anymore. He wasn't just cheating on me, he'd made a habit of it. I stared at the screen and felt a mixture of pain and relief. The truth was out in the open. That night, when he returned home, I tried to act as if nothing had happened. He arrived smiling, even bringing dessert, saying he'd remembered me. It was this contrast that destroyed me most. The ability to pretend, to change masks like changing clothes. The man who shared my bed was a stranger. I began to avoid physical contact. I faked headaches, fatigue. He noticed, but never insisted too much. Perhaps he knew the separation was a natural consequence. Perhaps he thought that as long as I said nothing, I was safe. But little did he know that I was silently watching his every move. One morning, the maid left her cell phone on the counter. It vibrated with a notification, and my eyes went straight to the screen. I didn't have time to read much, just one sentence. "See you later, at the usual place." My stomach churned. I no longer needed a name, nor context. I already knew everything. From that day on, living together became unbearable. Every time I saw them together, even in normal situations, my mind filled with images. The kiss, the hotel, the messages. It was like carrying a movie on repeat inside my head, on a constant loop. And the weight of it drained me completely. I decided I needed to change my strategy. Simply observing was no longer enough. It was time to prepare the ground for a confrontation. But I wanted it to be precise, with no room for denial. Something that would make clear to everyone who he really was, and for that, every detail needed to be planned. I started recording dates in a secret calendar. I noted the times he went out, the days when the routine seemed strange. I created a pattern, a timeline that showed exactly when the betrayal occurred. It was like investigating a criminal, but the criminal was the man I shared my life with. Sometimes the weight was unbearable. I locked myself in the bathroom to cry in silence, washing my face so as not to leave marks. No one could imagine what I carried inside. To the world, I was still the devoted wife, the woman I'd always been. But inside, I no longer existed as I had before. He continued living normally, full of excuses and easy smiles. The more I saw, the more I understood that the betrayal wasn't a slip-up. It was a lifestyle, a daily choice. And that hurt more than any initial discovery. He had never been who he claimed to be. One Saturday, I pretended I was going to visit my mother. In reality, I parked a few meters from the hotel I'd already met through Uber. I waited for hours, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, until finally, I saw him get out of the car with her by his side. They laughed, complicit, as if they were a free couple. The scene cut me like a knife. I wanted to run away, scream, expose myself right then and there, but I held back. I knew a hasty confrontation could weaken me. I needed something bigger, something definitive. I took a deep breath, swallowed my tears, and wrote down the time. That moment would be saved for the reckoning. I returned home with my mind spinning. There was no more room for doubt. Now it was a matter of time. I was determined to show the truth, but in the right way. Not just to him, but to everyone who believed the mask he wore. His downfall was inevitable. Every time I looked at him, I saw two faces. That of the man who promised me fidelity, and that of the man I saw kissing another. This duality corroded me, but it also strengthened me. Because each lie he made pushed me closer to the truth I would reveal. And as he slept peacefully beside me, I already knew. He was building the final scene of his own downfall. All that was left was to wait for the perfect opportunity, and it was about to arrive unexpectedly, like a gift from fate. That Monday morning, I woke up with a strange feeling of relief and anger at the same time. It was as if my body had finally accepted that the lie no longer had room inside me. I went to make coffee, and as I set the table, I noticed my hands were shaking. It wasn't just nerves, it was the anxiety of someone who knows a turning point is approaching. He walked into the kitchen smiling, unsuspecting. As he talked about the week's schedule, I observed every detail, the tone of his voice, the way he flicked his phone, hiding the screen. He looked like a teenager trying to hide it, and this realization gave me even more strength. It wasn't just pain anymore, it was indignation. With each gesture, my resolve to expose everything grew stronger. The coffee was served, but the taste was bitter. I decided to turn on the television to disguise my silence. That's when a report came on about marriages broken up by betrayals discovered on social media. He laughed and commented, "Anyone who falls for that kind of thing wants to." I swallowed hard. It was like listening to a thief mocking a neighbor who'd been robbed. At that moment, I knew for sure. He thought he'd never be found out. At work, my mind no longer kept pace with spreadsheets or meetings. Every break was filled with memories, plans, and strategies. I relived the scenes and sketched out possible confrontations. I considered speaking to him alone, in private. Then I thought of something bigger, something that would make it clear to everyone. My mind wavered between pain and a desire for justice. That night, he arrived late again. He said he'd been stuck in a last-minute meeting. I just looked at my watch and nodded. Inside, I already knew exactly where he'd been. I didn't need to ask or argue. The silence was stronger than any accusation. And that silence made him comfortable. The maid continued her routine, as if it were just another normal week. But the look she exchanged with him when they thought I wasn't noticing suffocated me. It was as if there was a complicity that was driving me from my own home. I smiled on the outside, but inside, I was accumulating more and more scars. I decided to discreetly install an app on my phone to monitor the devices in the house. It was simple, not advanced, but sufficient to record access and movements. Within 2 days, I was able to verify times that coincided with his departures and her arrivals. The evidence was there, cold, indisputable, and it gave me the strength I needed. One night, while washing the dishes, I noticed their reflection laughing together in the window. It was a common scene, but it carried a devastating weight. I knew that laughter wasn't innocent. It was laden with secrets, with stories that didn't belong to me. The plate slipped from my hand and nearly shattered, but I took a deep breath and continued. My children were now adults and no longer lived with me. Sometimes I wondered if they should know, but I decided to spare them for now. I didn't want to involve their innocence in this dirty game. This burden was mine, and I would carry it until the right moment to drop the masks. It was my life at stake, and I wouldn't back down. One day, during a quick lunch, he left his cell phone on the table and went to the bathroom. The phone vibrated, and the message appeared prominently, "I can't wait to see you later." I felt my body freeze. I took a quick photo of the screen and put the phone back exactly as it was. When he returned, I smiled, as if nothing had happened. That record became my secret weapon. So I finally had something explicit, a sentence that left no room for comment. I tucked the image away carefully, knowing it wasn't time to reveal it yet. But deep inside me, a flame of confidence reignited. For the first time, I felt in control. The following days were spent observing. He continued to make excuses, she continued to play her role as employee, but I was no longer the same. My posture changed, my eyes never wavered. And I realized that perhaps he was beginning to notice my pointed silence. It was as if my gaze said, "I know." One afternoon, I came home early on purpose. When I opened the door, I saw them both in the kitchen, laughing about something on his phone. They quickly backed away upon seeing me, like someone caught red-handed, but they tried to hide it. I simply greeted him, showing nothing. Inside, my heart burned with anger, but also with anticipation. That night, I thought about everything I'd experienced over the years. The promises, the trips, the birthdays we'd celebrated together. It was painful to realize that perhaps it had all been based on a lie. But at the same time, I felt proud to be silently resisting. I wasn't a passive victim. I was preparing to be the voice of truth. The following Saturday, he suggested dinner out. He said he wanted to make up for the stress of the week. I accepted, even though I knew it was just an act. At the restaurant, he held my hand and talked about plans for the future. I looked into his eyes and saw only emptiness. Every word was a false echo, devoid of any real power. When we returned, I saw a notification for a ride on his phone. An odd time, the address close to where I already knew he was meeting her. He noticed my look, but laughed and said, "It was a mistake, someone must have used my login." That was the last straw. The lie was so poorly constructed it bordered on mockery. In the early hours of the morning, I got up and went to the living room. I sat on the couch, hugged a pillow, and let the tears fall. But they weren't tears of weakness anymore. They were tears of someone who already knew what to do. I was tired of waiting, but I also knew that every minute of patience made me stronger. On Sunday, I gathered my courage and began organizing all the evidence. Printouts, statements, schedules, photos. I put together a logical sequence, almost like a report. I wanted that, when the time came, there would be no way out. No excuses, no way to turn the situation around. The truth would come out, clean and devastating. As I sorted the papers, I realized something curious. The pain that had once destroyed me now nourished me. It was as if each piece of evidence was a brick in a protective wall. I was no longer just a betrayed woman. I was a woman ready to face and overcome. And this realization gave me a strange sense of peace. He continued to act normally, but I noticed he was more cautious. Perhaps he'd noticed my change, my coldness. But there was no way I could have imagined how far I'd already gone. The tables had turned, and I held the cards. He just didn't know it yet. At a family dinner, I watched how he behaved around others. He joked, made jokes, and portrayed himself as the perfect husband. But every smile of his reminded me of the nights he'd faked meetings. I watched silently, but my gaze was that of someone no longer fooled. I began to notice his little slip-ups. He'd forget to delete a notification, leave an explanation half-finished. Maybe it was overconfidence or carelessness. But for me, it was proof that the mask was starting to wear off. And when the mask weighs on you, it falls off on its own. One afternoon, the maid let slip a phrase that struck me. We were in the living room and she said, "Your husband is very generous. He treats everyone so well." His tone was innocent, but his eyes spoke otherwise. I swallowed hard and just smiled. But inside I noted another hint of cynicism. Time passed, but instead of weakening me, it strengthened me. I no longer reacted with despair, but with strategy. I learned to transform pain into fuel, anger into focus. Each step he took was just another step toward his downfall, and I was ready to witness that fall calmly. One day, while tidying his room, I found a small receipt in his pants pocket. The place was a cheap motel, and the date coincided with one of the days he claimed to be on a business trip. I held the paper with trembling hands, but instead of crying, I smiled. It was the final piece of evidence I needed. I folded the paper and placed it with the other documents in the folder. I looked at that file and realized it was no longer just a record. It was a verdict. I held in my hands everything I needed to unmask a liar and free myself. And the time was approaching. I took a deep breath, closed the folder, and put it away again. My heart was beating fast, but not with fear. It was anticipation, almost like the feeling before a show begins. And in this show, I wouldn't be the victim. I would be the voice that shattered the silence. What I didn't know was that the revelation would come at an even more unexpected moment. Something not even I could have planned. A loophole, a trivial detail, but one that would undeniably expose everything. Fate was preparing its own trap. The week began like any other, but I was already on high alert. As I made coffee, I noticed he was more restless than usual. He checked his phone every few minutes, as if waiting for something important. I watched silently, analyzing every gesture. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen, but the taste was bitter. On the way to work, I decided to follow his car. I kept a safe distance, my heart racing. He didn't notice, or perhaps he underestimated my attention. I saw him stop in front of an office building, but didn't go in. He stayed in the car for a few minutes, checking his phone, until she appeared, entering the same building. I felt my body freeze. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. She had no reason to be there on a Monday. Everything seemed orchestrated, every step calculated. He got out of the car soon after and followed her inside. I noted the time, the place, everything recorded in my memory and on my phone. I waited about 40 minutes, and they left together, smiling discreetly. They walked close, but without touching. Still, the complicity between them was evident. I got in the car and watched from afar until they parted on different streets. My chest burned, but my mind filled with certainty. That night, during dinner, he fabricated another meeting. He said he'd closed an important deal. I just nodded, without question. His fake smile no longer touched me as it once had. 'Cause now I'd seen it with my own eyes, and nothing could erase that image. Over the next few days, I continued my routine of silent espionage. His little slips became evidence in my hands. Odd schedules, app notifications, repeated trips to the same places. Every detail added up to the dossier I was building. He thought he was in control, but I was already steps ahead. One night, I decided to mess with the living room camera again. I reviewed the recordings and found banal but revealing scenes. She arrived early, tidying things that didn't need tidying, always waiting for him to show up. Her smile in the camera's reflection gave me chills. It was as if she knew someone might see. At work, my colleagues noticed I was different. A friend asked me if I was okay, and I responded with a tired smile. I couldn't share it yet. The battle was mine alone, but deep inside, I felt a new strength. It wasn't just pain, it was a resilience I hadn't even recognized. One day, while he was sleeping, my phone vibrated beside me. A short but devastating message. "I miss you already." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, holding back the urge to scream. I didn't take a screenshot, just mentally recorded it. This was another brick in the wall of truth. A wall that would soon come crashing down on him. I decided not to rush. I didn't just want a confrontation. I wanted something definitive. I wanted every lie exposed without him having any way to defend himself. And for that, I needed to wait a little longer. Patience was painful, but necessary. I told myself this every night before bed. Over the weekend, he suggested a quick trip to relax. I found it ironic. I accepted, but deep down I already knew it would just be another act. During the trip, he was attentive, affectionate, almost impeccable. But eyes don't lie, and his shone in a way that wasn't meant for me. We returned home Sunday night, and I immediately noticed his nervousness. He checked his phone every minute, secretly texting. I watched, pretending to watch television. The contrast between his forced affection and his anxiety was stark. It was like living with two different men in one body. I decided to talk to my trusted friend again. This time, I told her everything. I showed her proof, screenshots, schedules. She was shocked, but supportive. She told me I needed to take care of myself, that I couldn't carry this alone. Her words brought me relief, but they also increased my responsibility. Now, someone other than me knew the truth. The next day, she appeared with a strange look in her eyes. Maybe she'd noticed my change, maybe it was just my paranoia, but the atmosphere grew heavy. It was as if she knew the secret was no longer as protected. The silence between us spoke louder than any words. That night, I prepared dinner as usual. I set the table, served the food, but I could barely swallow. He chatted animatedly about future plans, trips, investments. I just watched, thinking how hollow those words were. He was planning a future with me, while living the present with someone else. Midweek, I received an anonymous call. A female voice, calm but firm. "You don't deserve what he's doing." Before I could respond, the call dropped. I was shocked. Who could it be? A friend of hers? Someone who also knew the secret? It shook me in an unexpected way. I spent the night thinking about that call. The fact that someone else was involved meant the betrayal wasn't so hidden after all. Maybe there were more people in the know, laughing behind my back. This idea gnawed at me even more. I wasn't just being betrayed, I was also being deceived in front of an invisible audience. I decided to investigate further. I installed a tracking app on my own phone and synced it with my computer. That way, when he used my home Wi-Fi, I could identify strange connections. Soon, I noticed connections coming from places that didn't make sense. Hotels, restaurants, meeting points. The network didn't lie. Each piece of evidence increased my confidence. It was no longer a question of, is he cheating on me? It was a question of, when will I expose him? This difference completely changed my attitude. I no longer reacted with pain, I reacted with strategy. And that made me stronger every day. One night, lying in bed, I realized I wasn't crying anymore. The tears had dried, and in their place was a coolness. It wasn't indifference, it was focus. I no longer needed to convince myself of anything. The truth was before me, clear as day. And I was ready to face it head on. The next morning, he left in a hurry, saying he had an early meeting. Minutes later, I received a message from a friend. I just saw your husband going into a cafe, but he didn't seem alone. My heart raced, but not with fear. It was as if the universe was confirming what I already knew. I wrote down the address and discreetly made my way there. I parked in front of the cafe and waited. It wasn't long before I saw them leaving together, side by side. The complicity between them was evident. There was no more room for excuses. I saw, photographed, recorded, and I put everything in the folder that was already becoming a book of truths. When he returned home, he brought flowers. A small gesture, but full of cynicism. He handed them to me, saying, "I've been thinking about you all day." I held the flowers, smiled, and thanked him, but inside they tasted like poison. It was living proof that he knew how to deceive even the most subtle details. That night, I sat alone in the living room for hours. I observed the flowers on the table, fresh, beautiful, but already meaningless. They were the perfect symbol of what I was experiencing, something beautiful on the outside, but rotten on the inside. I smiled to myself, realizing the cruel irony of the situation, and I committed this detail to memory. The following days were filled with increasing tension. He seemed more nervous, perhaps sensing my coldness. I avoided arguments, avoided questions. Silence was my weapon, and he was beginning to feel uncomfortable. It was like watching someone hang themselves with their own rope. One afternoon, he arrived late again. But this time, he didn't come in alone. She came with him, carrying a bag of clothes. She said it was to wash with my things. I feigned casualness, but my heart was bursting inside. Their audacity reached levels I'd never imagined. I looked at her, then at him, and realized something. They were no longer afraid. They were confident I didn't know. This gave me even more power. Because their fall would be harder precisely because they believed they were safe. And I was ready to watch from the front row. That night, I sat in bed beside him and simply watched as he slept. Every calm breath he took reminded me of the falsehood he'd sustained. My heart pounded, not with pain, but with anticipation. I knew I was just steps away from the decisive moment. And when I least expected it, life would bring me the final piece of this puzzle. A clue so simple, yet so revealing, that it would make the entire castle of lies crumble in seconds. And I already felt that moment was about to happen. On Friday morning, I woke up before him and watched. He slept peacefully, as if he carried no guilt. That serenity revolted me. It was like living with an actor who never broke character, no longer saw a husband, but a stranger taking up space in my bed. As I made coffee, I heard his phone vibrate on the table. The notification lit up the screen for seconds, and I quickly read, "See you later, same place." My stomach churned. I didn't need a name. The content said it all. It was as if fate were effortlessly handing me proof. He walked into the kitchen smiling, hugging me from behind. I felt immediate revulsion, but I hid it. I casually asked about the day's commitments, and he confidently replied, "Just work meetings." I swallowed hard, knowing the lie. It was incredible how easily he repeated false statements. I spent the day at work like a ghost. I couldn't concentrate on anything, just replaying the last few scenes. The message, his smile, the audacity of keeping everything hidden. I no longer had any doubts. I just waited for the right moment to act. Patience turned into strategy. That afternoon, I decided to leave early again. I parked the car near the hotel I already knew. I waited, my hands cold and my heart racing. Minutes later, I saw his car pull up. She got out first, fixing her hair, and hurried inside. He followed soon after, looking around. The scene was brief but definitive. I discreetly took photos, capturing every detail. I saved them on my phone, sent them to my email, and even saved them on a flash drive. I didn't want to take any risks. That evidence was stronger than any excuse he could come up with. Now I had the truth frozen in images. I returned home with a heavy mind. He would be home later, as always. While I waited, I sat on the couch and opened the folder with all the evidence I'd gathered. Photos, screenshots, statements, messages. It was an arsenal against him. I felt a mixture of pride and pain. I was ready, but I still didn't know how to reveal it. When he arrived, he pretended to be exhausted. He threw the company folder on the couch and went straight to the shower. I watched him silently, pondering the absurdity of the situation. He believed he was in control, but he was already trapped in a web I had built, and he had no idea. In the following days, I noticed he was more relaxed. Perhaps he thought his lies were working. I, on the other hand, was cooler. I no longer sought explanations, I didn't ask questions. I just observed, and this silence made him even more comfortable making mistakes. I decided to schedule a meeting with my friend again. I brought some of the evidence to show her. She was shocked when she saw the photos of the hotel. "You have everything here, there's no way he can deny it." Her words gave me momentary relief. But deep down, I still felt something was missing. What I lacked was courage. The courage to turn evidence into action. The courage to face the storm that would come after the revelation. It was easy to collect evidence, but difficult to expose the truth. I knew my life would change forever the moment I laid it all out on the table. As I reflected, I realized he was preparing a business trip. I received the notification in the shared email about a hotel reservation. But fate didn't match what he'd told me. I felt my anger rise like fire. It was the lie he'd planned in advance, and I had confirmation in my hands. The night before the trip, he'd been strangely affectionate. He'd prepared dinner, put on music, tried to lull me into a romantic mood. I just watched, almost silently. It was like watching a play. His every gesture seemed rehearsed, empty. There was no more love, only manipulation. When he fell asleep, I went to his suitcase. I discreetly opened it and found new clothes, ones he'd never worn with me, a different perfume, newly purchased shirts. I closed it again, leaving no trace. But inside, a certainty grew. He wasn't going for work. He was going to live a parallel life. The next day, I followed the trip remotely. I monitored the transportation app and the card transactions. Everything matched the patterns I already knew. I didn't need to be there to confirm it. Each notification was like an arrow piercing my chest, but it also gave me more ammunition. When he returned, he brought gifts. An expensive blouse for me, chocolates for home. He smiled as if he'd fulfilled a duty. I accepted, thanked him, but inside, I saw only irony. He thought he could buy my silence with gifts. Little did I know that my silence was already calculated. At work, I tried to maintain appearances. But little by little, my posture drew attention. Colleagues asked if I was okay, and I responded evasively. It was difficult to maintain the mask every day, but I knew I couldn't weaken before it was time. It wasn't time for the explosion yet. One afternoon, while he dozed on the couch, I heard his phone vibrate again. I quickly picked it up and saw the message. It was perfect. "I miss you already." This time, I didn't just take a picture. I forwarded it to my own number and discreetly deleted it. I kept it as another irrefutable piece of the puzzle. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized I wasn't crying anymore. What I felt was coldness, almost as if my heart had been numbed. It wasn't a lack of love, it was an excess of lucidity. I knew exactly who he was now, and this clarity gave me more strength than any emotion. The weekend arrived and he suggested a barbecue with friends at home. I accepted, but with ulterior motives. I wanted to observe how he behaved around others. During the gathering, he was the perfect host. He joked, smiled, hugged, but every gesture felt false. The mask was firm, but I knew what lay behind it. While friends praised our marriage, I smiled politely. No one could imagine the truth I carried. It was a heavy, suffocating secret, but it was also my most powerful weapon. And when the time came, everyone would know, and his downfall would be much greater. After the barbecue, he went to take a shower. I sat in the living room, looking at the mess left by the guests. The house seemed normal, but I knew it was contaminated by lies. That made my chest tighten. How could something so simple hide so much poison? In the days that followed, I realized he was becoming suspicious of my silence. He asked more often if everything was okay, trying to force smiles. I answered with short sentences, leaving no room for discussion. Silence was now my strategy, and it worked like torture. One morning, he left in a hurry and left his computer open. I tried not to appear anxious, but I went to his desk and glanced quickly. There were deleted emails, hidden folders, but one detail caught my attention. Restaurant reservations made in advance. Places we'd never been together. I wrote down every detail, every restaurant name, every time. It was further confirmation of what I already knew. But seeing it written down, planned, cut me deep. He wasn't just cheating on me, he was carefully organizing a parallel life, and that was even crueler. That night, I made the bed and lay down next to him. I closed my eyes and listened to his calm breathing, but I couldn't sleep. My mind wouldn't stop spinning. I knew the moment was near, the moment when all the masks would fall. I looked at him sleeping and thought, how many lies can fit in a smile? How many broken promises can fit into a single touch? The weight of this reflection suffocated me, but it also reassured me that I wouldn't give up. I needed to see it through. While he was peacefully dreaming, I already knew his life was about to change. Not by chance, not by fate, but because I wouldn't accept being deceived anymore. And when the time came, there would be no turning back. What I hadn't imagined was that the next clue would appear in a banal way, in a small detail. Something that would go unnoticed by anyone. But for me, it would be the missing key to unraveling everything once and for all. The morning began like so many others, but something was different. While organizing the kitchen, I noticed a detail I'd never noticed before. The supermarket receipt he'd left on the counter listed products I would never buy. Expensive wines, imported chocolates, scented candles, items that didn't fit into our daily lives. I took the paper with trembling hands and analyzed every line. The purchase had been made at a time he said he was in the office. My stomach churned. It wasn't just a slip-up, it was planning. He was creating romantic atmospheres, but not for me. When he returned home, I casually asked about the market. He answered without hesitation, saying he'd only bought some fruit. I smiled on the outside, but inside I felt the fire of the lie burn. It was impressive how calmly he maintained false stories. Almost as if he believed them. That night, I decided to go through his car while he slept. I discreetly opened the glove compartment and found a parking receipt. Location: the same hotel that already appeared in his Uber records. I felt a shiver run through my body. It was as if the universe had placed the evidence directly in my hands. I closed everything and went back to bed. He slept soundly, unaware that every step was being monitored. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how much that relationship was already over for me. What remained now was just the final revelation, and she was closer than ever. The next day, routine resumed as normal. He left early, as always. I feigned indifference, but something inside me was shifting. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was a strange calm. The certainty that the end was set brought me an unexpected peace. I decided to visit the restaurant that appeared on one of the card statements. I sat at a table, ordered a coffee, and took in the ambiance. It was romantic, cozy, perfect for discreet encounters. I asked a waitress about the table reserved for a certain date. She smiled and said, "Yes, I remember them." My heart raced. Them. She didn't need to say anything else. The confirmation was there, simple and direct. The waitress continued talking about how nice they were together. With each word, I felt the ground disappear. I left the restaurant with shaky legs, but with yet another proof etched in my memory. When I got home, I found flowers on the table, a large bouquet, accompanied by a note. "Thank you for always being by my side." I read those words with contempt. They weren't for me, they were for the image he wanted to maintain. It was just another smokescreen to cover up the drama I was living. I spent the night analyzing every detail. Photos, receipts, statements, messages. The folder was already heavy with so much evidence. But it wasn't just a file, it was a mirror. Each document showed who he really was, a distorted reflection of someone I once loved. In the following days, I noticed he began to contradict himself in small ways. He'd say he'd been one place, but the receipt showed another. He'd talk about meetings, but the schedule didn't match. It was like watching a house of cards begin to crumble on its own. I just watched. The maid also seemed more confident. She moved around the house lightly, as if she had nothing to fear. This hurt me even more. It was as if I'd lost my place in my own home. But what they didn't know was that I was letting the rope tighten on its own. One afternoon, I accidentally heard a call on speakerphone. He spoke softly, but I still understood. "Don't worry, everything's under control. She doesn't suspect a thing." My entire body trembled. It was living proof that they underestimated my intelligence, and it only made me stronger. That night, I couldn't sleep. I relived every word of the call, every disguised laugh, every repeated lie. The pain was intense, but at the same time, I felt I was nearing my limit. There was no way I could keep up this charade for much longer. Something big was about to happen. At breakfast the next morning, he noticed my silence and asked, "Is everything okay?" I looked him in the eye and calmly replied, "Everything's great." And I smiled. But that smile wasn't one of happiness, it was one of war. He didn't realize it, but in that moment, I declared the end within myself. I decided to get even closer to the clues. I installed a program on my home computer that logged activities. Within a few days, I was able to capture access to reservations, messages, and even meeting confirmations. The evidence accumulated almost automatically. It was as if he wanted to give himself away. Over dinner, he excitedly told me about a new project at work. I just listened, but inside I remembered the records on the computer. I knew he wasn't in a meeting at that time, but in a restaurant with her. The contrast between the lie and the truth was devastating. I began to prepare a silent plan. I didn't just want to confront him, I wanted to definitively expose him. I considered gathering the family together, exposing the evidence to everyone. The idea scared me, but it also liberated me. I wanted him to feel the same humiliation I'd silently endured. That week, I received a strange text message on my cell phone. It was from an unknown number. "He's not who you think." There was no name, just the phrase. I felt a chill. Was this someone trying to warn me? Or just confirming what I already knew? Either way, it was another sign that the deception wasn't so hidden. I talked to my friend and told her about the message. She told me masks always fall, sooner or later. That kept hammering away at me. I knew the moment was near, but I didn't know how it would happen. Maybe I wouldn't be the one to pull the final piece. Maybe life would do it for me. Meanwhile, he continued his routine of lies. Smiles at breakfast, apologies at night, fake weekend trips. I wasn't as shaken as before, because now each lie of his was just another push toward the inevitable outcome. One day, I came home early and found a detail that froze me. On the sofa, a small gold earring that wasn't mine. I picked it up with cold hands and put it in my pocket. It wasn't just proof, it was carelessness. And carelessness means their trust was too high. He arrived hours later acting normal. I greeted him, served dinner, and said nothing. But inside me, the earring burned like fire. It was the physical proof I could show anyone. There was no innocent explanation for it. It was the missing piece. I spent the night staring at the earring on the table, small, discreet, but weighing like a bomb. I knew I would soon wear it as part of the revelation. From that moment on, there was no turning back. The end was written. All that remained was the right moment to open the book. The following days were filled with pure anticipation. His every gesture, every word, seemed to echo in slow motion. I observed everything with the calm of someone who already knew the final outcome. He just didn't know his time was running out. That Friday I noticed he'd dressed up more than usual. New perfume, starched shirt, shiny shoes. He said he was meeting an important client. I just smiled, tucking the earring into my pocket. I didn't yet know how I'd use it, but I knew it would be the perfect weapon. As he left, I looked out the window and felt a shiver. The feeling was clear. Something big was about to happen. Not by chance, not by choice, but because the truth doesn't hide forever. And I was ready to watch the outcome of this story. I woke up on Saturday determined to no longer hide behind silence. I made the coffee as usual, but every movement seemed rehearsed. I placed his cup on the table, served the bread, and waited for it to come down. He appeared minutes later, smiling, as if life were perfect. I sat across from him, watching him calmly. As he talked about the day's plans, my mind wandered to the earring tucked away in my pocket. That small piece of jewelry carried immense weight. It was the missing physical proof needed to complete the puzzle. I stared at him silently, and he had no idea his charade was about to collapse. I decided not to confront him there. It wasn't the time yet. I needed to wait for the moment when the exposure was undeniable. Silence was my greatest weapon, and I knew how to use it well. While he ate calmly, I was already planning every detail of the next step. During the afternoon, he left again with his usual excuse. He said he had a quick meeting and would be back soon. I watched him get ready with almost adolescent care. I put on lipstick, put the earring in my pocket, and discreetly left a few minutes later. I already knew where to go. I followed his car at a safe distance. Traffic was light, and my heart seemed to be beating with every stoplight. After a few minutes, he pulled up in front of the same hotel. I parked a little further away and watched. She arrived shortly after, laughing, as if she knew the situation. The impact of seeing them together was brutal, but I took a deep breath. I grabbed my phone and recorded the scene. Sharp, clear photos that spoke for themselves. I kept everything silent, feeling the weight of the moment. It was as if I had finally reached the edge of a precipice. I waited until they entered the hotel and drove back home. The steering wheel felt heavy in my hands, but my mind was steady. The plan was becoming increasingly clear. There was no longer room for doubt. It was only a matter of time before everything came to light. Upon arriving, I found the room silent, lit only by the afternoon light. I sat on the sofa, took the earring from my pocket, and placed it on the table. I stared at that object, as if staring at an enemy. Small, but devastating. The perfect metaphor for betrayal. He returned hours later, bringing dessert as an apology for being late. He placed it on the table and kissed my forehead. I accepted the gesture, but inside, anger boiled. I glanced at the earring still on the table, hoping he'd notice. But he passed right by, distracted. That night, while he slept, I decided to organize everything in a single file. Photos, receipts, screenshots, receipts. I created a presentation with every detail of the betrayal. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. I wanted everyone to see the same truth I saw. On Sunday, he seemed more nervous. He asked repeatedly if everything was okay. Perhaps he'd noticed my different look. I responded only in short sentences, remaining calm. The silence was beginning to bother him, and that gave me even more strength. I decided to invite the family to dinner the following week. I said I wanted to get everyone together to celebrate an early birthday. He accepted without question, believing the excuse. I knew that night would be the stage for the truth. The moment when all the masks would fall. In the following days, the tension increased. He continued his routine of lies, but he no longer seemed so confident. The small slips piled up, and I watched each one. It was like watching someone walk on thin ice. At any moment, it could shatter. One day, while going through the laundry, I found a shirt of his with a strange smell. It wasn't my perfume, nor his. It was her perfume. I held the garment against my face and took a deep breath. Anger burned in my chest, but it also gave me clarity. The proof was everywhere. When he arrived, I threw the folded shirt on the bed. I calmly asked, "Whose perfume is that?" He froze for a second, then smiled. He said someone at work had bumped into him. I didn't argue. I just smiled back. The smile that made him feel comfortable but hid my certainty. That night my resolve became even firmer. There was no more room to wait. Dinner with the family wouldn't just be a get-together. It would be the stage where the truth would be revealed before everyone. And I would do it with the calm of someone carrying out justice. I spent the week preparing everything. I reviewed the documents, organized the evidence in sequence. Even the earring was included. Nothing would be left out. I wanted each piece to speak for itself, without needing a single word from me. He, without knowing it, helped me every day. He brought gifts, made up stories, tried to keep up appearances. It was like watching someone digging their own hole without realizing it. And I just watched, memorizing every detail. On Friday, the day before dinner, I felt a weight on my chest. The anxiety was immense, but also liberating. I was about to end a painful cycle. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew it wouldn't be worse than continuing to live a lie. On Saturday, I woke up early and started preparing the house. I set the table, arranged the dishes, chose the background music. Every detail was thought out to make it seem like an ordinary evening, but deep down I knew it would be a historic night. When he came down the stairs, he complimented the decor and hugged me. I felt my body stiffen, but I didn't show it. I just responded naturally. He had no idea what was about to happen, and that was the cruelest detail of all. The guests began arriving as dusk fell. Laughter, conversation, hugs. Everything seemed normal. He circulated among his family, distributing smiles and charm. But I knew that soon those looks would change, and the mask would fall before everyone. I sat at the table and watched as the food was served. The atmosphere was light, almost festive. But inside me the tension was unbearable. Each second seemed to drag on for hours. I was just waiting for the right moment to light the fuse. As he made a toast, I looked up. His smile was confident, assured. He was grateful for being surrounded by loved ones, talking about family and love. I almost laughed. It was the most well-rehearsed theater I'd ever seen, but it was about to end. My heart was pounding, but my mind was calm. I knew that when I presented the evidence in front of everyone, nothing would ever be the same. The life he built based on lies would fall apart before the eyes of those who mattered most. The night progressed, and I held the moment. Every detail, every fake laugh was another spark inside me. When I decided it was time, I got up discreetly. I walked to the furniture where I had stored my briefcase. The silence in my mind was deafening. I placed the folder on the table in front of everyone. He looked at me, surprised but still smiling. I had no idea what was coming. And at that moment I realized there was no going back. I was about to turn the page of an entire story. And it was at that exact moment that the doorbell rang. A simple sound, but full of omen. The surroundings froze for a second. And within me, a certainty was born. The truth would not wait any longer. She was knocking on the door. When the maid unexpectedly entered the dinner, carrying the bag, the atmosphere froze. I placed the evidence on the table, extracts, photos, the earring, and saw his expression crumble in front of everyone. The family watched in shock as each lie fell apart. I left that house with my suitcase packed and an unprecedented feeling of freedom, knowing that the consequences for him were just beginning. I took a deep breath, looked back just once, and understood that my life would no longer be the same. Pain gave way to strength, and I was finally free to start over. And I leave you with a reflection. How many women will still ignore the signs? And if it were you, would you have the courage to expose it? Or would you keep this weight in silence?